Hi, welcome to another episode of Shop Talk Live. This is episode 341, and this week we had a special guest. We have not had Chris Gochnour on the podcast in a while, so Mike Pakovich and I got to catch up with him, ask him questions about hand tools like backsaws and what kind of shoulder planes you should get, even talked a little bit about what is the appropriate height for your bench. I wanted to mention that moving forward from episode 342 on, Fine Woodworking's Shop Talk Live will now be on its own independent YouTube channel, so you can find that at youtube.com/@ShopTalkLive. Without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Well, hi, Chris. So this week I'm joined by Mike and Chris Gochnour, which you haven't been on in a while, right, Chris? I don't know the last time.
It's been a while.
It's really good to have you back.
I don't remember the last time either, but it was fun.
No, it's really good to have you back. And we've had some questions specifically for you kind of saved up. So we'll be able to dive into those in a minute.
Okay.
But yeah, what have you two been up to lately? Let's start with that.
Want me to start?
Yeah.
Please do.
All right. Well, kind of doing the same thing that I've always done, a lot of woodworking, bit of family time, bit of recreation. Woodworking over the last several years has kind of changed a little bit. I've done some neat commissions, but not, my work used to be all commissions for 30 years. And, as time went on, it sort of shifted from less of the commission work to more of the teaching, to where now it's almost all teaching. Teaching at Salt Lake Community College, although I've pared down. I used to do 2 classes, a day and a night class, but now I'm actually just doing the day class. But I do private instruction at my shop, and I've got 8 students.
Wow.
They come typically one at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and they're 4-hour sessions. Several are once a week, and others are every other week.
Okay.
And so that between those two, it keeps me really busy, and I actually really enjoy it. I like that the private lessons are great because we basically are just building furniture. A student and I of their choosing, their design or whatever. So it keeps me really active and versed in the processes and design and so forth. It's just nice that there aren't deadlines. That was a challenge with commissioned work, is you're just always behind trying to meet deadlines. So that, and then the other challenge, I guess, with the commissioned work is you present a bid at the outset, and you hope then when all is said and done, you make something.
Yes.
And the teaching is by the hour, so it has its advantages. But I don't regret for a minute doing the commission work for as long as I did, because I learned so much and just really enjoyed what I did.
So what's the difference between teaching one-on-one in your shop versus teaching at the school? I'm guessing it's a semester-long program you're teaching. So that's got to be more structured.
Yeah, there we do more of a project that everybody does, kind of like what you might do at, say, Mark Adams or, another school where there are classes out there, though, where they're called personal projects, where students can build their own, where, on the private, it's just, I've got 8 things going.
Sure.
with the 8 different students, meaning what I'm saying is it's one at a time.
Yeah.
But in my life right now, I'm working on with the student 8 different projects.
Wow.
Does that make sense or no?
Yes. No, that's a lot. So I'm just wondering if you even have time amidst all that to do any commission work, or even, is there such a thing as personal woodworking?
No. When I've done the commissions, I've kind of done them in the summertime where I'm not at school. Mm-hmm. And I do I have to pare down the lessons as well, the private lessons. So yeah, not doing a lot of commissions.
cool.
In a way, you kind of are
Well, I
though
am.
with the
No,
yeah.
I am.
It's
It's
like,
the person that's commissioning them is also learning and building.
right.
Yeah,
And
it's actually worked out really well.
I'm
I'm
glad.
enjoying it.
It seems like
So
fun, and it speaks to your skills to be able to just, okay, here's 8 different projects, 8 different approaches, and like by the hour.
Storage is a bit of a challenge sometimes.
Sure.
I've got a table coming up, but it's like a trestle table out of white oak, and it's like 44 by 10 feet.
wow.
So that one, that one I'm going to have to build the top at the very end. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Get it on the trestle is kind of knocked down, and so that's manageable. But
Okay.
when the top's built, it's going to have to just be put on and moved out of the shop. So
Right. Yes. Very
Wow.
cool. So, Chris, I know I've learned sort of the hard way that knowing how to woodwork and knowing how to teach woodworking are 2 completely different things. How do you navigate between the 2?
well, I don't know. I mean, I guess have been teaching for a good while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess the teaching just goes. It works pretty well for my mindset, I suppose.
Yeah.
I haven't noticed a lot of difference between when I work independently alone in the shop or when I'm working with a student. Of course, the project classes are quite different,
Yeah.
where you have 15 students and they're all building the same thing. Those become a little bit more like production woodworking,
Right.
right? Where you can do setups and really capitalize on the efficiency of a setup versus
Correct.
the one-on-one where everything has to just be set up for that particular process. And that's really how you work individually as a craftsman too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I first started teaching, I automatically just taught the students the way I would do it in my own shop. And a lot of times that
Okay.
was kind of hit and miss. And I found that when I started to kind of engineer things that the students were going to have success with,
Yeah, that's a good
I
point.
ended up
Yeah.
doing it that way myself in my shop. Like I think I kind of relearned and got to be a little bit better, more efficient woodworker rather than,
Okay. Yeah.
we have the means to sort of fake our way through a process and get it
Sure.
done,
Sure.
which we can get by with, but like you said, 10 or 15 students might have problems with that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that sort of is interesting there is you have to really be. I like to, when I do a class like that, I almost have to have 3 things maybe going at once. So there's not a big
sure.
wait for the, whatever the setup, and so that takes, that's a lot different than working on your own. You have to anticipate you've got this many people that have to get through the same doors.
Yeah.
And so spreading, those applications out where some people can be doing this, but that, that's all has its own challenges.
Yeah. I know you've taught at Mark Adams, so you know what kind of situation that can
Yeah.
be. I think my personal record was, I believe I had like 11 setups going at one time.
I can't even imagine.
So that was a little bit hairy. Fortunately, there's, a lot of
The
good
assistant.
assistants
Yeah.
keeping
Yeah.
eyes on things.
Right.
But yeah, it's a different way of teaching. One thing I envy you about in terms of teaching at the college level is hopefully, I'm guessing you get to assign grades. Like I wish I
Yeah.
could grade people.
Yeah.
I'd be scared to be graded by Mike Pekovich. I don't know.
What's interesting about that though? So like I only did one college level woodworking class. Well, actually I won't even go into that. But my feeling is it's not like a math class or a science class or something like that. These guys are there because they love it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they want to learn it. And I think I mean, of course, I've given grades that aren't stellar, but it's typically because they've not shown up or they've not put the effort in. If they come and if they have limited abilities, I do not want to be the one that discourages them from pursuing woodworking.
Sure.
Saying you're no good. I prefer to be more encouraging. So
that makes sense, because when you do tool reviews, one of the toughest things is to get you to say bad things about any of the tools.
I'm sorry about that.
This hand plane is great. It just needs a little filing and flattening of the bottom and maybe a replacement blade, and it works fine. So
you know me. You know me. Yeah, I've actually had some students with learning disabilities, and but they show up, they love what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I've had their parents reach out to me after the class and said, your class was the best thing that ever happened to my son. And I actually have to say one other thing. I oftentimes teach, like, how would I like my son's teacher to treat him? You understand what I'm saying? I look at that and I'm thinking, I want my son to get as much help and care as he can. And as a parent, I appreciate that when I know that he has, and I kind of like to think that way when I'm teaching too. These are human beings that just deserve care and respect. So.
Very good point. I'm going to have to take that mindset into my next class I teach.
Yeah, I used to teach. I set up people. I used to work in like this community, like nonprofit, where I taught people woodworking with like pretty severe learning disabilities, and like just having to think about. I actually feel like it actually made me a better woodworker. As the way what Mike's saying is, like, I go and I'll freehand something, but then to construct like a jig that made it easier for them to hold something, or much safer, like to the point where I'm like, I know that to a certain level of woodworker could jump in and just do this, but to like take things to that level and restructure things.
I'm sure everyone succeeds.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it like taught me a lot about jig making, even, it translated so much. But yeah, I appreciate that way of thinking, because it does change people's perspective when they're given an opportunity to, especially like, work with your hands. Like, there's so much pride that comes with that.
Yeah.
It's like a really, it's a beautiful thing. But I love that. Mike, are you working on anything specific right now since we last spoke?
Yeah. I mean,
always.
In short, I'm working on my third book. So, and that's going to be a lot of things sort of hand tool related within the shop. So I'm kind of working on a section. I do a small travel chest that I literally travel with when I teach, and I end up teaching that as a class. So that's one of the chapters. And I just did an e-learning video shoot with that. So I had all these parts and pieces. So I just started photographing that as I was prepping. And after the video shoot, I just got back to finishing up the chest and photographing that all along. So that was sort of a nice kickstart on a book that had been on the back burner for the last 2 years or so. So and I love the process of making a book. I'll go out and shoot. I'll go on my computer. I'll get the pictures onto the page. I will block everything out and then go back and write. And for me, it's like it's a really, really fun, intuitive, creative process. And it kind of combines everything I like, which is woodworking and photography and writing and layout. And it's just, I'm kind of re-energized. And I just, over this last weekend, I made a Japanese tool chest as sort of a companion piece. And I wrote that, and this would be a good project, for hand tools only, which I'm not a hand tool only woodworker. So I kind of said, well, let me try it. So I went and bought the Ryoba Japanese saw so I can do some cross cutting and ripping with it, and figured out a way to cut dados by hand and make sort of dado dividers for all the tools by hand as well.
Yeah,
And it was
cool.
it was fun. It's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, this is actually kind of fun. So that was my big discovery, was sort of jumping back into kind of a hand tool only approach. Chris, you've always been sort of a mix of machines and handwork. Have you ever been the hand tool only?
Well, so I mean, I'll tell you where I learned so much about hand tool. There's a college a couple hours south of Salt Lake called Snow College, and for like 22 years, I would teach a class that was only 3 days, on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and we would build hand tool only projects. Now, we didn't prep the stock by hand. That's the big caveat. You know, all of the boards and sticks were prepped.
Right.
But once those were prepped, everything was done by hand. And we did some amazing projects, really amazing. And a lot of one individual in particular started the first year I did it and was there the last year I did it. And it went for, like I say, 20 something years.
Wow.
And every year was a different project. I'd have 3 criteria. It had to be something you could do by hand in 3 days. It had to be affordable because the school provided the materials and prep and all that. And it had to be something you'd want in your home.
Yeah, that's a tough combination.
But honestly, I learned so much because, of course, as Mike knows, and Amanda, I'm sure you do too, the teacher learns far more than the students.
Yeah.
And having to do that every year, it forced me to learn so much. Yeah. So I have done the hand tool exclusive, and I really do enjoy it. And it's really translated to, hand tool skills in my shop, which I just benefit from immensely.
Yeah, in fact, you'd written a sort of a series of articles on hand cut joinery for us, which I learned a lot from. Thank you very much. And you did the kind of the infield cupboard.
Yeah.
And I know you taught that at Mark Adams, and I think you teach that as sort of a hand tool only project.
Well, and right, that we did that at Mark Adams, and if you can believe it, that was actually one of the things we did at Snow College in 3 days. But we had to do the mortise and tenons with the machine.
Okay.
Those were the one thing that, but beyond that, and I think we might have had some moldings prepped ahead of time, but that was done in that 3-day class.
Remember, I was out there at Mark Adams the same time you were, and I think one night, I think it was a Wednesday night, you were ordering out pizza, and it's like, no, my guys got work to do. They're going to stick around late tonight. So it's like, wow, taskmaster.
Well, and I won't say how late they used to stick around at Snow College. Those were late nights. Just intensive, but good times.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. What do you say we jump into some questions? Because we have some good ones, and I feel like we can go really in depth with these.
Sounds good.
Great. This one's from Mike, and it is, I've done only minimal hand tool woodworking until the past year. Now that I've gotten some experience, I love woodworking with hand tools, and I'm looking to round out my Backsaw collection. I was reading up on carcass and tenon saws recently, and I heard a well-known and respected authority on hand saws say that there's no difference in the cutting ability or quality of cut between a ripped filed saw and a cross-cut pattern if the teeth per inch is 10 or higher. I'm curious what your thoughts and experience are on this. Is there any particular advantage to keeping those finer saws all rip patterned?
Yeah, Chris, I was waiting to hear your answer on this.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I do have an answer.
Okay, good.
I don't have a single crosscut joinery saw. I've got panel saws and hand saws that are crosscut, but all of my joinery saws are rip. Why?
So when you say a joinery saw, what do you mean?
Well,
as
like a
opposed to-
dovetail or
Okay.
a tenon.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So even if you're cutting shoulders across grain, you're still using a rip saw for that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't have a crosscut saw in that I mean, actually I do because I collect things.
Yeah.
But in my shop where my go-to tools are, there's not one that's crosscut. Why? Well, rip is easier to file than crosscut.
Okay.
And if you want to use a handsaw, it's got to be sharp. And it's difficult to get handsaws sharpened. I mean, there's not a single place in Utah that I can send it to. And in all honesty, there's not many people in this country that you can send one to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yep. It's like I know two guys, but I can't name a third guy. So yeah.
Yeah, no, there's just not a lot. I mean, Lee Nielsen used to file theirs, but I don't think they do anymore.
Okay,
I might be
that
wrong,
would have
but I know that there was a period where they would file their saws, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. And so I came to the realization that, if I want to use these things, I've got to be able to maintain them. And so I bit the bullet and started filing them. And, I actually had pretty good luck right off the bat with the rip saws.
Okay.
And then I got quite into filing at one time where I was doing crosscut, like I said, the panel saws. Most all of my saws are sharpened myself, but I just found that the crosscut was just a little bit trickier. It really took somebody that did a lot of it consistently to master it. But the rip saw is really, I think anybody can manage a rip saw with a little guidance and reading up on the techniques. And so that is why, because I have to maintain my own saws, I don't want to ship them off somewhere.
Right.
And then, so then just out of curiosity, well, no, so this came up, I don't know when I discovered it, but Tay Frid, if I'm saying that right.
Yep.
I know that I was reading something where he advocated only rip filing for joinery saws. He would use, of course, the frame saw. And I thought that was interesting. In fact, I even did a search yesterday to make sure I'm not spreading lies. And of course, the AI vouched for that thing that Tayfrid only filed rip. And anyway, and man, I'm curious. You mentioned somebody that was highly respected. So this guy did, I think. Yeah, in his letter, he was aware of somebody that was highly respected in woodworking that only did that. I'll leave it at that. But Mike, what are your thoughts on that? Or Amanda, what are your feelings?
Yeah, Amanda, what are you sawing with these days?
I use I don't, I have two dovetail saws that I've used maybe once. To be honest, I don't think I'm much of an authority on this. I'm interested though, like if is it just I never thought about like the filing process, but is it just also the fact that it clears, you can cut through things faster with a rip saw than a crosscut?
Yeah.
Or it's clearing more. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I could speak to this too much, to be honest.
Yes, and the reason the crosscut is slower is because it's filed more like a knife, so that it is scoring the fibers as it goes across the grain to give a cleaner cut. And the rip saw is more like a chisel, and so it's just more aggressive and more like just chopping rather than slicing. One thing that's interesting, and I learned, well, I didn't learn this, but it was confirmed with what I read about the Tay Frid. It said a rip saw works just fine across the grain as long as you have a knifed wall.
Okay, so you're pre-scoring the wall, right?
Whenever I do a dado or a shoulder for a tenon,
yeah,
I knife the wall and then I chisel to reveal the wall that I can butt the teeth right up against.
Right.
And therefore, that almost negates the need for those sharp teeth, you know, the knife-like teeth.
Okay.
So I think that's actually kind of an important thing to include in the discussion.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of went about it the opposite way by accident, in that my very first quote unquote dovetail saw I bought in college, it was an English backsaw, and it had like 1 billion teeth per inch. You could almost
Oh,
hardly see
yeah,
them.
right. Yeah.
I cut dovetails a little slowly on that thing for a really, really long time. And it wasn't till many years later that I took a magnifying glass to it and said, oh, this is a crosscut saw. And the one thing I did like about it, when I kind of thought about it, and I could be guilty of thinking a little too deeply about this kind of stuff, but because the teeth are kind of angled and you have the opposing points, you know, to score the fiber, I found that when I was cutting dovetails, it started really well, like it just locked down because those teeth were kind of establishing the location.
As opposed to slipping sideways. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, as opposed to the flat teeth possibly skating back and forth.
That makes sense. That does make sense for sure.
That said, I get along just fine with rip, sharpened dovetail saws, which I have 3 of right now. They all get plenty of use. So, one of my saws, I had a kind of a carcass saw, or tenon saw, I think it was called, from Lee Nielsen. I never used it because it was sharpened with a crosscut, and I sent it to Matt Cianci. He's local in Connecticut. He does my saw sharpening for me, and actually he just wrote a book for Lost Art Press on sharpening saws. So if you want to sharpen your own saws, check out that book. I think it's really good. I've read it. I still haven't tried sharpening my own saws yet, but I think if any book is worth taking a look at, that is. Anyway, I gave that saw to Matt, and something that's sort of been in vogue in the last 10 years or so is a sash cut, which is kind of halfway between a crosscut and a ritz or hybrid. So I had that sharpened there, but I just never think to reach for it, so I can't even say if there's any difference there. And then the Japanese saw I use, which I used for many years to cut dovetails, is a crosscut, sharpened blade. So they work fine. Rip saws work fine.
And do crosscuts too, you know.
Yeah.
My only thing there is if you're going to, if you're sharpening them yourself, I know the rip is easier to learn on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good answer.
Yeah, I have to try. The reason I have 3 dovetail saws is that so I can bear it apart with one for a couple weeks to have it sharpened. So
Sure.
Even then, it's tough to do without any of them.
Perfect. Let's jump into. Okay, we do have a question about another hand tool. So this is from Max, and he asks, I recently purchased my first block plane, the Lee Nielsen Rabbit block plane, because I thought this would be a great multi-use tool capable of training tenons, shoulders, and faces, as well as doing all the normal tasks a block plane could handle. I also purchased this shoulder plane soon after that, thinking it would be another great tool for the arsenal. I'm now interested in a regular 60.5-inch mouth block plane, particularly for its use as a Kamiko strip thicknesser. And I'm worried I may have impulsively purchased the wrong block plane. So my question is this: is it good to have both a rabbit block plane and a shoulder plane, and or both block planes? And does the rabbit block plane do things that the shoulder plane can't?
I have an opinion about the block rabbit plane. So I want to know, Chris, what you think about it before I jump in with a rant.
Okay. Well, I think there's place for both his shoulder plane and that rabbit block. So I don't have, well, I do have that plane, but I also have a skewed block that I use for my tenon cheeks. When I'm cutting a tenon by hand, and you scribe the lines and you cut as close with the saw as you can, but then you need to come, right to those lines on the cheeks. I find that the rabbet block, the wider blade covers more territory than a shoulder plane typically does. The skew cut on the rabbet is nice because, going cross grain, it gives a real clean cut. What's fun now, this is also really funny though, and maybe we'll touch on this as to a benefit of the Lee Nielsen, which doesn't have the skew, that particular plane he's talking about. So I'm right-handed, but to use that skew plane with your tenon laying horizontally, you actually have to pull it towards you. Okay, you have to use it on the pull stroke towards you, because if you turn it the other way, the projection of the blade is away from the shoulder and not towards it. I'm not sure if that's making sense.
Yeah, so that's the Lee Nielsen skew block plane where one side comes off to expose.
Yes, actually mine's, the Veritas, but and it doesn't have that side that comes off. It's just always open.
Okay.
But the Lee Nielsen would be the same. You just remove the plate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so my workaround on that improved things greatly. What I did is I took my tenon and I mounted in my vise vertically. Okay. And then the protrusion of the blade was on the correct side, right up against the shoulder. Okay. And better yet, that is the position you should really pair the cheeks of your tenon, because you can see things completely when they're right there in your face. If it's horizontal on the bench, you can't really see your scribe lines because the plane is in the way of it.
Yeah.
Is that making sense? So by holding it vertical, it works, at least that plane that I have works on the push stroke.
Yeah.
And it just makes it all the more easy to see. So to go back to the original question, you can use that rabbet block plane from Lee Nielsen for the very same application. The reality is you wouldn't have to push or pull it regardless of the situation, because it doesn't have it's open on both sides.
Correct. Right.
Yeah. And then does that work as a shoulder plane? I think that's where it's not really ideal. I mean, I think the cutting, say, fine-tuning a rabbet or working into a shoulder, trying to clean up a shoulder on a tenon, I just think that the ergonomics of a shoulder plane lend themselves a little bit better to those applications than that broader lower body on the block plane.
I completely agree. I almost want to hear Mike's opinion before I jump into this. So, but I agree with you completely on that. Yeah. I do want to hear your thoughts, though, Mike.
My take is half in jest, just because an ex-staff member had the block rabbet plane, and we would argue about whether or not that was a good plane. I think one of the biggest challenges is exactly what the question asker mentioned, which is, I think it's pretty common for a lot of people to see the block rabbet plane and see it as a double duty plane and say, hey, if I'm going to make this investment, I'll get this. I can do two things. And I think that everybody needs a block plane. I think everybody needs a shoulder plane.
Yeah.
While you put it exactly on the head, Chris, the block rabbet, what I think it really excels at, because of the really wide blade, is you can take a pass on a tenon full width, and on a narrow shoulder plane, if you're having to take multiple passes across a long tenon, the chances of staying dead flat aren't that great. So a tool that I learned the value of from Will Neptune is a sort of like a Stanley 78, a rabbet plane, with the open thing. And then like a 190 is another variation, I think, without the stops and fences and all that kind of stuff. But those things are super cheap. You can get those. I think you can still find them for $30 or $40 at flea markets. and that has the really wide blade. And I learned to use that to do my tenon cheek. So that, in essence, was my kind of block rabbit plane, in that it was a wider blade. I could handle that. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really cool tool. I think the wide blade can help you out on something like tenons, but I don't know if it necessarily takes the place of, it kind of takes the place of a block plane. And to your point, I don't think it takes the place of a shoulder plane. So.
Yeah, and even as a block plane, I would probably never be inclined to grab it.
Okay, I was being a little generous,
even though
but yeah,
it can work. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it does work fine as the rabbit.
Amanda, I didn't throw you under the bus.
Can I say, if you only wanted one, what I'd recommend?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd go with a large shoulder plane, because the blade on those is pretty wide, that it can, it can do the cheeks of a lot of tenons.
Yes, right.
It's not that much narrower than, say, those rabbit block planes. And it can do shoulders, it can do rabbits, and even though I have both a large and a medium.
Yep.
And the medium gets used 5% of the time, the large gets used 95% of the time. Even when I'm just doing smaller tasks, I like the size of the large one. It just seems to fit my hand, and so my take is a large shoulder plane if you can only have one.
That's a great point, and it brings up a question I get really frequently from students: is what size shoulder plane should I get? And my first shoulder plane was a medium, because the big one scared me, and I ended up trading for a big one from someone who had small hands, and they said, no, I don't like the big one. And ever since then, I'm with you, Chris. That's my favorite shoulder plane. But to recommend to students, it's really hard to get them to see a big, giant 10-pound wide shoulder plane and not be a little intimidated by it. So, Amanda, where are you at with the block planes and block rabbit planes?
I have both. And I got this, I'm wondering if I got this recommendation from the same person, but I got the 60.5 because of its multi-use. I say that in quotes, but I really don't, I have both, but what I do, and the advantage of, I'm sorry, I have the rabbit block plane. I bought the rabbit block plane as a multi-use kind of approach to it. And it was my first nice tool I bought. I got the 60.5 after that, and the way I use it now is, yes, wide tenons. If I'm taking down a fit to something, there's an advantage there.
Yes.
And I have it set otherwise, generally speaking, for a heavier cut. So I use it as a heavier cut block plane. The 60.5, the advantage is the adjustable mouth. So I have that set for really fine cuts. And if I had, having the advantage of both is one is a little heavier and one's for finer cutting, and I can just grab one or the other. But I afterwards got shoulder planes, and that the larger registration, you're right, the ability to see what you're working on. I agree with you guys completely, but I do have both, and I did use the 60.5 for a while. But the rabbit, I keep doing that backwards, but if I had to go back, I'd get the 60.5 first.
Okay.
You can take a much more controlled cut with that.
And what size shoulder plane do you have?
So I don't know what medium would be, but I have two H&T Gordons. I have, I believe, a 1/2 inch and then a 3/4 inch.
Okay.
And those have been really great.
Medium, but
Medium, okay.
Yeah, that's good. Those are nice.
So those are the solid wood body with the little brass insert or brass.
Yeah, the brass insert. Cool. Yeah, and the brass wraps around, so you have that nice registration for the 90s. Yeah, it's a really nice plane for shoulders, so it's hard to not use that when I can. But yeah.
So Chris, so when students ask what size shoulder plane should I get, can you talk them into the big one, or do you let them try out both and let them pick?
Well, I recommend the large, but say, there are reasons to get the smaller. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure There are some.
I do have smaller hands, so I feel like it makes more sense for me. But
yeah.
I travel with the medium
Oh,
because
do you? Yeah,
that big guy is heavy. So if I'm flying and checking bags, I have to weigh everything, and I'm usually like storing my shoulder plane in with my socks and underwear and my other regular suitcase and stuff. So.
Well, and I suppose, let's be honest, if you're really using it just as a short shoulder plane to trim shoulders or fine tune rabbets, they're not going to be that big or that wide,
Right.
and so the only advantage of the bigger one is maybe a little more to grasp with your hands, and it covers more real estate.
Yeah, I do like the mass of it. It does seem to drive through a cut pretty nicely. All right. Okay, so we need a shoulder plane, a block plane, and a rabbet plane or a really big shoulder plane.
Right, there you go.
Basically all the tools you can get.
That's what we need.
Okay.
So the answer is you didn't buy the wrong plane. You just haven't bought enough planes yet.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. We have a finishing question, or in the vein of finishing, that I think Chris is also perfect for, but this is about fuming oak. So this is from Al, and this is directed towards you and Chris. So it says, I know Mike uses fumed oak in his work, and I saw Ben's video where he was experimenting with the fuming, which motivated me to do some experiment of my own. My experiment wasn't as elaborate as yours, but it involved some red oak purchased from Lowe's, some janitorial strength ammonia from Ace Hardware, and a plastic container. But even with the red oak, I was surprised. After 24 hours, I got such a deep, dark brown color. I've attached a picture of my test pieces, so I decided to make a small tease box with red oak from the same source and use my fuming process for finishing. I placed my box in my fuming container, and after about an hour, went to check on the box and move it to a different place. While moving the box, I got careless, and an edge of one of the boards got wet with ammonia. I removed the board from the container and wiped it off and let it dry. At first, I thought the edge is darker because it's wet, but after an hour, it was clear that the color had changed. Rather than living with my mistake, I decided to wet the entire box with ammonia and placing it in the fuming container. After about 6 hours, I got my expected results, and I've attached those two pictures with different lighting. And I'll put these in the show notes. How come I got this dark color from red oak? Everywhere I searched, they mentioned that red oak doesn't have enough tannin to produce dark colors. I repeated the experiment with different pieces of red oak and more or less got the same result. Surely I'm not the first person to let ammonia actually touch the wood rather than fuming. What stops experts from painting, spraying, or dipping the wood in ammonia? And am I sure there's a good reason I'm not aware of.
What you got, Chris? That's a lot there to chew on.
Who wants to go? You want to take that one first, Mike? Or you want?
Oh, Mike, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, I was muted because my cat was snoring really loud, and I was afraid it was making it onto the recorder. So no, Chris, go ahead. Do you have experience fuming?
Well, yeah. I've never done red oak, I don't think, but let me say a couple. Let me answer his last question. What is to keep anybody from just brushing it on, wiping it on, or spraying it on? I wonder if what he actually got at Ace Hardware was the true janitorial grade. The stuff you get at the grocery store is 5%, I believe, 5% ammonia. And I know that they do one that you can get off the shelf that's 10%. And I think that may be what they call janitorial grade.
Correct. That's what I buy. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the stuff that you can actually get at like a janitorial supply house is 26%.
So that's the heavy duty.
That's the heavy duty stuff. And you would not want to be brushing that or putting it on with a rag or breathing it at all. It's just really potent. So I would say that the true, I think they call it aqueous ammonia. Mm-hmm. You need to fume with, where it's contained in a tent or some container that doesn't allow the fumes to migrate through, through your shop. You could, you can do it outside safely too, but that's a little bit hard in the winter time. Summer, it's ideal because the heat, ammonia likes heat. It's a stronger process when it's warm or heated. So, that would be the one question as to why not to apply it by hand. If you're using the 5 or 10%, Mike, would you be comfortable doing it by hand probably with the
I've fumed a lot, and out of curiosity, what if I just paint this on? Is it going to go faster? I didn't find that it actually had as strong of an effect. It certainly raised the grain because it's a very high water content.
Okay.
And I don't think the finish was particularly even, but I think in my mind, it almost didn't really do anything. So I almost think like the fuming action, the vapors or whatever, might be more effective about penetrating the wood. I don't know. But I have probably tried to fume red oak by accident in the past because sometimes it can be a little tough. I think red oak, there's like at least 10 different species of oak that are sold as red oak. So it could be you're working with a species of quote unquote red oak that might have higher tannins. But I think what the listener did is exactly right, is check it out on a sample board. Just kind of see what works. And it does definitely have to do with the tannin content. And certainly red oak is known typically to have a slightly lower tannin content. It certainly is enough to get some color out of it. I was really impressed at how dark he was getting, but
I would agree. I will say this. I thought his box was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
The color, that was really a beautiful box. And, if you can get that color in red oak, then keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And you're right. I've had pieces. I'll just use a black plastic trash bag for smaller projects in the driveway on a sunny day, and you throw a little thing in there in like 2 hours, bam, it's as dark as it's ever going to get. Whereas in the wintertime in the shop, when it's cold, I'll fume 24 hours, sometimes even longer, just to sort of get a kind of a medium tone. So yeah, temperature does make a difference.
Real quickly on species of wood that, fume. I know cherry takes on a real pretty color fumed. And the last little box I built for fuming was out of Douglas fir. The framework of the box was Douglas fir, and then it was wrapped with a plastic tarp. And I fumed white oak in that, but I could not believe how beautiful the Douglas fir was. Of course, it's in there getting the ammonia too, and man, it kind of killed the red that is natural with the Douglas fir, and it was this golden brown that is like the beautiful old European pine, with the dark grain lines. And I've not actually done it on a piece, but it made me want to because it colored it so nicely.
Very cool. Yeah, and the one thing you'll find out really quickly is the tannin content will change from tree to tree, even within the same species, and you'll have these perfectly matching boards in your piece, and then you fume it, and all of a sudden it looks like a barber pole. Or because the sapwood does not fume at all.
Right.
So all of a sudden you have these little slivers of sapwood showing up on corners that you didn't expect to be there. So
you have to be good at touch up, don't you? I know.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So Al, just keep that same board of red oak for whatever you want to fume.
Yes. And just don't, sample boards don't depend on the next board to red or white or whatever to color up the exact same way. Fingers crossed it will.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We have one more question. I think could be answered. We're getting close to time, but I think could be answered and is a really good question from Damon. He says, my understanding that the conventional wisdom for hand tool users is to have lower workbenches that power tool users use, and that hand planing is a primary reason for that recommendation. Stanley and Lee Nielsen planes both have forward-leaning handles which seem to favor a low bench, but I use primarily Veritas bench planes. Do the more upright handles of the Veritas planes favor a higher bench? And for context, I'm 6'3", and my current bench is 34 inches tall.
Okay. That one puzzled. I mean, that one's hard for me to answer.
Let's just go with general bench height for someone working, with hand and power tools. Like, if you got to pick a height, what's it going to be?
Well, I wonder if his isn't the height. Mine is 34, and I think I patterned that after the Olmias, that used to come out of Germany. Okay. And I just figured, I just figured that was a pretty good starting point. But I'm 5'11", and this gentleman, I forget his name, but is 6'3", so he's got 4 inches on me.
Yeah.
And so I would say his probably is a bit low, but does that have advantages to hand planing? I'm not sure.
I think maybe it depends on the type of hand planing you're doing. I mean, if you are starting with rough stock and you got a scrub plane and you're really bearing down, maybe a lower bench can help. But I think the main thing is, for most of us, we're doing a lot of different types of work on the workbench. So basically, if you find sort of a middle ground, it's a bench not ideally suited for anything, but it's going to be close enough to get the work done. Chris Bexford wrote a really cool article for us on, so he had what I would call a standard height bench. There might be a little taller because he's pretty tall, but in order to do more heavy hand planing, he has, I think it's like a 4-inch riser that just lives underneath his bench. He pulls out, and that's his low bench. And then he has like a Moxon vise, a twin screw vise to bring the work up for dovetailing. And then he's got an even taller tilt top sort of tabletop he clamps down for carving. So he's modulating the work height on a fairly regular basis, depending on what he's doing. Yeah. And
that was one thing that came to my mind on this bench situation, is it's actually easier to raise a bench up than it is to lower it down.
Yeah, that was my thought. Is like, if I need to get a Moxon vise for some work down the road, like I'm 5'4" and my bench is 30, almost 32 inches.
Okay.
So I worked on a 34-inch bench when I was apprenticing, and it was a little bit challenging for me. But it was not ideal.
And interestingly too, I've worked on 36-inch benches, and they're too tall for me. I notice it when I'm at a bench that height. So a bit of it, I think, depends on what you're used to, what you work at and are accustomed to.
Yeah, I think because I learned on a taller bench that probably wasn't ideal, this seems fine. But yeah, my thought would be, if you can design it to where you can bring the work pieces up whenever you need to and start lower, that's probably what I would do.
Yeah, and depending on the height of your bench, at Connecticut Valley, I'm not sure what the average height of the student benches are, but Bob has these blocks where he can sort of hoist up one end at a time of the benches and throw these kind of plywood tubes underneath each. They still seem to be fairly stable, but I would question overall the stability. And also in my shop, my bench is too heavy to be lifting up single-handed and then with 1 foot kicking a little riser there. But one thing, Steve Latta did a really cool article for us, which was basically like a little mini benchtop bench. And so, because he does a lot of inlay work and small, fine routing work for inlay and stuff. So this benchtop bench is probably 12 inches high with a little mini cast iron end vise on one end. So he clamps that, and that really elevates the workpiece for really fine, kind of small work, that's kind of cool. So I guess the big question is for this person, how often are you just like hog and stock with a hand plane? Maybe you do want to start with the lower bench. Although if you're 6'3", possibly a 34-inch bench is already on the low side. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So, like you said, it's certainly easier to raise the work surface up starting with the lower bench. So,
one question he had, and then he was curious on the slope of the handle.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
A traditional handle that's canted a bit more forward versus the more upright. I actually use both interchangeably, and in all honesty, I really don't notice the difference. I'm not sure that on the height issue it would be much of a bearing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it. I have both Veritas and Lee Nielsen planes and Stanley, and I know with the Veritas planes, the handles are kind of chunky.
Yeah.
They're a little bit heavier. I have pretty large hands, so that doesn't bother me, but I can imagine if folks for smaller hands, that might be a little bit too big. The other thing sort of akin to that is all saws, backsaws have a different hang, meaning the angle of the handle in relation to the blade, and it can change quite a bit. So I mentioned I have a few different dovetail saws, and I use them all without thinking. Like they're all interchangeable. And when I actually looked at the hang, one of them, the hang was like off by I don't know, at least 15 degrees. Like it looked like that should really make a difference when I'm sawing. I think I'm just very insensitive to handle angles, so maybe it doesn't matter.
No, I kind of would agree on that too. So
I guess whatever you get used to, I guess, ends up working.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I would have to catalog the fit of every dovetail I cut and cross-reference with the saw that I cut it on.
How you did.
Yeah.
Next episode.
Yes.
No, I appreciate you both joining me today. This is really good stuff. And always great having you on, Chris.
Thank you for the chance.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We need to have Chris on more often because I learn a lot. And
Yes. Yeah, this is very educational.
Yes.
Amazing woodworkers and inspirational. So it's been a privilege.
Very cool.
Thank you. Well, yeah. Thanks so much, and look forward to next time.
That wraps another episode of Shop Talk Live. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by liking and subscribing. Again, we will now have our own independent YouTube channel for future Shop Talk Live episodes, and I'll link that below. Feel free to email us with any questions or ideas for podcasts, and you can contact us at shoptalk@finewoodworking.com or jump in our Discord channel. That's a great way to see upcoming episodes and get customized questions in for our future guests. I wanted to also mention we are doing another build challenge. For the month of May and June, we're teaming up with the Woodworkers Book Club, which is run by Owen Madden, who is one of our Fine Woodworking ambassadors. And the challenge this month is to put together your 3 favorite forms of woodworking media, whether that be a book, an article, it could even be plans. And the second part of that build will be a challenge to build something to house those, whether you're building a bookshelf, bookends. Ben even suggested a cool little clipboard for the shop. I love all those ideas, and there aren't too many rules to it, but join our Discord channel to check that out and participate. We'll be giving away a few special prizes at the end of the build and have a special guest to come look at your projects. Look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks.